I remember exactly saying at that time, Brett, you're 45. If you don't do this now, if you don't beg, steal, and borrow enough money now to get this going, you're not going to do it when you're 55 because it'll look too difficult at that age. I felt that. So I really pushed myself to get it going.
Today we're on site at Soumah and we're talking to the founder and director, Brett Butcher. I'm Jason.
And I'm Trent, and we're here on an unapologetically unprofessional, unfiltered wine journey. And we're saying you, Jace.
Our saying is drink more, try more, learn more. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Brett, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys for being here.
We were fortunate to meet you probably over a year ago through Brendan Robnick. And we had such a great tour of your winery and the vineyard here. We want to dive into your story. We wanted to dive into the story of Soumah. But first off, we're going to ask you the wind-up icebreaker questions.
Yes.
I'll pass over to Trent.
Okay, first one, Brett. Is there a most memorable wine or most memorable wine moment that you've had?
Yeah, I think when I saw that question, I thought, it's not about a wine, just about an experience. When I first left university, I was working in a restaurant on the Gold Coast in Australia. And I'd done quite a lot of wine, lectures at university. It was a hospitality degree. I was a trainee manager in this restaurant on the Gold Coast. And my boss, the owner of the restaurant, he had a great cellar upstairs in this restaurant. This was like 1980, right? So we're talking a few years ago now, 45 years ago. He had this great cellar upstairs in this restaurant. And so we'd work lunch together. And then he'd say, at the end of lunch, a few people still filtering out, he'd say, Brett, go up and get a bottle because we're going to have it for lunch. So, I was like 21, 22 years old. I'd go up to the cellar, I'd pick a bottle, I'd come back down with it, and then we'd sit there and drink it at lunch together. And he was about 40 years my senior. And then he'd say, Brett, what do you think about that wine? Why do you say that? Can't you smell those raspberries? It was that experience of every lunch going up and getting a bottle of wine, bringing it down and having to explain it with Bruce Carter, who was the owner of this restaurant, was a really memorable experience and really a foundation for me, on my wine journey.
There must have been some fantastic wines in that cellar.
Yeah, there was. It was Australia 1980. So what were we drinking? Good question, right? Good question, because Chardonnay had just been found, and all of a sudden people started to drink Chardonnay. But we were drinking reds because this was a beef restaurant.
Yeah.
So I remember drinking like 1968 Redmonds, Coonawarra.
Yeah.
Very nice, and a lot of Barossa and McLaren Vale stuff there too, because Yarra was very in its infancy at that point, right? And so it was mainly the bigger reds from South Australia.
Fantastic. Next one. What's the last bottle of wine that you had?
Last night I had funny enough, we're talking Yarra Valley now. So you're thinking Pinot Noir and you're thinking Chardonnay.
Yes.
I had a bottle of Yarra Valley Riesling last night.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and which I thought was really good. It's from Seville Estate over on the Warburton Highway. And it was a 2018. And I got it because I don't see much Riesling from the Yarra, but it had wonderful petrol, flavors, a bouquet to it. So it really got that aged Riesling effect to it. Still nice lemon and lime. So got me thinking maybe we should be doing more Riesling in the Yarra.
Did you speak to your vineyard manager as well?
Straight out this morning. Let's plant Riesling.
No.
You did say there's some new plantings that look good.
I know.
Yeah, there is some new planting.
Next question. Favorite grape variety?
Favorite grape variety? Oh, wow. That's a really tough question. But, I believe that everybody has their wine journey, right? You might start off, and a lot of people start off on sweet wines, then they want power and they're getting to the big reds really quickly because that's got the fruit and the punch. And I contend that everybody ends up drinking Pinot Noir. as it's the destination of your wine journey for, I think, everyone, because Pinot is such a wonderful grape. It's one of the original grapes too, so it's a very historic grape. But because it's so flavorsome and layered, sometimes when you're having a Redmond, I don't mean to be disparaging about Redmond or a Cabernet from Soumah even, it's about the fruit and it's about lots of fruit, right? And it's about how that fills your mouth and fills your palate and fills your senses, but it's really about the fruit. Pinot's different because the fruit is lighter, right? It's just light fruit flavors, light cherries. And so what you're going to pick up is other sort of nuances. You're going to pick up some leaf and herb and mushroom and, you know what I mean? So it's about the layers in a Pinot that make it so intriguing, and really is why we're here in the Yarra, because I wanted to make great Pinot. And we found this spot on this ridge because, you know, it had already been made famous by Yarra Yearing and Coldstream Hills and others. And they were making great Pinot and still are. And so that's why we're here. So Pinot is my favorite grape.
I agree with you. I have some friends that they don't like Pinot yet. And in my mind, I'm thinking, you're going to get there. And
That's right.
It will happen.
They will get there. And they'll thank you for this.
Right.
I feel all roads lead to Pinot, but also can be a very slippery slope as well.
Very slippery slope. Very slippery slope, because it's a problem child. It really is. It needs a lot of tender, loving care. It's got to be planted in just the right spot.
Yeah. Okay, next one. Person, past or present, they would love to have a bottle of wine with. And also, what bottle would that be?
Even when I was like going through university studying wine, I started to bring wine home. And and my father was a beer drinker, but then he started to get into wine too. So we were always like, he would grab a bottle of wine and said, "Dad, that's terrible. You know, you've got to go and get something decent."
Yeah.
And, you know, just in those days, it was the big reds too. And then we'd go out for dinner, and then he would start ordering wine at dinner. So it was sort of quite an interesting turnabout from what he was like as a guy drinking beer most of his life, right? So, you know, I think that today, when I think about, it'd be great to have a bottle of Butcher with him, because named it after the family.
Yeah.
We have two. We have a Frank Wynyard cut of the Butcher.
Yeah.
We have a Thomas Hendy cut of the Butcher. And, you know, the Thomas Hendy cut's my great-grandfather. He was a brewer, so we named it after him. He was a brewer in Plymouth. He never came to Australia. But we thought, we're going to have a great-granddaddy wine. It better be quite big, right? So in that wine, we get the Syrah from Heathcote. But the Frank Wynyard cut, who's named after my father, is all Yarra fruit. So I'd love to have a bottle of Frank Wynyard Butcher with him.
Yeah. What would he say drinking that wine now, do you think?
What would he say? He was a very affable sort of guy. So I think he'd say, "This is great, Brett." I think.
That's it. Fantastic. Next one. Unique food and wine pairing.
I think some of the most unique food and wine pairings where you get savory and sweet together.
Yeah.
You know, if you get that together, you know, everyone's had bacon and maple syrup, right?
Yeah.
And on their pancakes, right? So you get this lovely sweet maple syrup, and you got this lovely crisp bacon there, and you got the fluffy pancake, and that's a wonderful thing, right? So I like that idea of sweet and savory together. So, you know, not everybody eats foie gras, but, you know, what does foie gras go really beautifully with but a great sauterne? So you got that.
Oh, I don't know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. Just get a lovely sauterne, you know. If you can afford it, get a Chateau Cam. I can't afford that.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's a lovely sweet sauterne, get some foie gras.
Sweet and
A
savory.
little bit of toast. Yeah, sweet and savory together. That's one of the great things that in my mind, you don't have to go sweet and sweet, or you don't have to go, okay, I'm having Pinot Noir, so I should have, you know, something that tastes like Pinot Noir. I think, you know, sometimes the opposite is true.
I thought it would have been some interesting kind of North Italian type of food and wine mix.
It is. You know, there's so many, right? There is so many. And, you know, the classic, because we plant a lot of Piedmont grapes here. And, you know, obviously the classic is angel hair pasta with truffle, white truffle, and a glass of Barolo, right? And that's a classic too. And that's sort of interesting and funny as well, because, you know, sometimes the Barolo can be quite big on that whole dish, and then you've got the beautiful truffle just shaved, just fresh, and that coming out with the Barolo is a wonderful thing too.
You getting hungry?
I am already hungry.
Okay, last one. Biggest lesson learned on your wine journey?
In relation to running a wine business,
Yes.
let's take it as that way,
Yes.
rather than something more when I was in my youth. But I guess some of the biggest things that I've learned along the way is that you always want to do things quickly when you're starting your wine business. You're making decisions. You want to see the grapes growing. You want to see the wine in the bottle. You wanted to get things done quickly. So I think my greatest lesson learned is that maybe I should have just backed off just a step or two and say, no, let's wait a season. Let's see how things evolve a bit more. So I think sometimes that's, you know, that rush to get something in a bottle, get something in a glass can be problematic and take your time. So, just try to be patient as you can. I know it's difficult. So it was difficult for me to do that.
Especially when you only have one vintage each year, though. It's not something that you can redo and repick those grapes.
Well, as soon as you've planted it, you're done, aren't you? Yeah. And what you've planted where and somehow your that journey may change down the track. Sure.
We'll delve into that a bit later. But that's the rapid fire questions, Jess.
That's the rapid fire questions. And you touched on journey there. We do want to talk about where your journey started. Well, when we met you a year and a bit ago, you really actually left a big impression on us, on myself, about wine, because you talk through the importance of the Italian varieties, particularly in handling climate change. You also went through the lineage of different grape varieties. And I thought, you're someone that's been born and raised in the wine industry, but you're actually not. Strong background in hospitality. If we think back to the start, and you may have answered this, what triggered your love for wine?
Well, I was doing a degree in hospitality to run large hotels, which I ended up doing as my career. But in the beginning of that course, because it's a hospitality degree, you start to do some wine units, like wine appreciation units and history of wine as part of that. And so that really piqued my interest in wine. And so therefore, down the pub as a teenager at university, people were drinking beer and I was starting to drink wine already when I was 18. And I was drinking pinot.
Already?
Yeah.
But it was hard to find. Halfway through this degree, I invested that time. I wrote away to Roseworthy College. And you had to write away then. There was no email.
Yeah.
Sent them a letter saying I wanted to come and do a wine degree. How many credits are you going to give me on my hospitality degree? Because there's some, business units and all sorts of things. Microbiology I was doing and all sorts of things. And so they said, they wrote back, Mr. Butcher, no, we give you 0 credits. Happy to come down and do the course, but you got to start again.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't afford that. I couldn't break that to my parents. So I finished that hospitality degree, started out with Bruce Carter in that restaurant, going and getting wine every day, and then just pursued this hospitality career, which, I was successful. I was happy. I was very lucky. I got overseas. And by going overseas, and I spent most of my career overseas, you sort of stop drinking Australian wine. You know what I mean? You stop drinking it. It's just not, the one that you want's not there anyway. So you start drinking all sorts of different wine, and you're running into people drinking lots of other wine as well. And then on that journey, because I ended up running large hotels, I'd have winemakers staying with me and winemakers selling wine to me. And then I would be doing wine and maker, dinners at hotels with winemakers. So my whole journey in my hotel career was still very, very much attached to wine, but generally overseas and actually tasting a lot of different wine.
Yeah.
And really getting an appreciation for international wine and, the classics of Bordeaux and Burgundy and Piedmont and other places. Then I would just accumulate enough, begged, stolen, borrowed enough money to invest in a plot of land here in the Yarra. So that was when I was 40. Was I 45? Yeah, 45 when I did that. And so it took me about 25 years to get to that point, because I had 25 years of my career when I bought it. And I remember exactly saying at that time, Brett, you're 45. If you don't do this now, if you don't beg, steal, and borrow enough money now to get this going, you're not going to do it when you're 55.
Yeah.
Because it'll look too difficult at that age. I felt that. So I really pushed myself to get it going, continued in my hotel career, and this was my sort of like my evening job, my weekend job.
You always knew that you wanted to set up a winery? Or, because to me, I could have an interest and I enjoy it. It doesn't mean I'm going to start making the products. So what was the turning point where you said, I actually want a winery?
No, yeah, I wanted to make the wine by having all those, chats with winemakers, and I was always going around wine regions and talking to winemakers. I just had this passion that, wow, this is so interesting, so much fun, and it's a great product at the end of the day. And I don't know. I never thought about anything else but actually doing it myself. Not like I'm just going to become a great wine guy or a journalist or nothing wrong with journalism. You know, it's really good. But I just wanted to just make the wine myself.
Is there a drive and vision at the end of that, though? You're creating the wine yourself, but is it for a purpose? Like here at Soumah, I feel like it's the whole experience. You know, you got the villas, you got the food, you got the wine. Is it bring a bit of that kind of hospitality to the people here?
Yeah, that's right. And that's the interesting thing. As you guys move around and you see that, you know, people start making wine that all of a sudden sprung up around them as a hospitality business a lot of the time, right? Because people end up wanting to show their wine, and then a restaurant happens, and then accommodation happens, and then, you know, so it's all almost by accident. I didn't get into this wine business saying, oh, I'm going to have accommodation here. I'm going to have, even though that's my training, hospitality. It wasn't because of that I got into it, but it ended up happening.
We have some fantastic Soumah wines in front of us that we're going to taste while we ask more questions. We might start it off with this one here, which is the Wild Savignin Solero No. 3 from Soumah, if you want to pour that out. And I remember tasting the Savignin last year, and it was the first time that we'd both tasted it and really opened up our eyes. And did you have a story about this wine and how it came about?
Yeah, talk about interesting journeys and what might be good and what might not be so good. This wine started out as an accident, planting it anyway, planting Savignin, which is, you know, one of its names, because we thought it was Albarino. The Spanish had sent it here as Albarino, and we'd heard that it was tasting good. Hadn't really at that point embarked on my Italian journey. And so we planted Albarino, and just before our first harvest, which took about 3 years to get it fruiting, the CSIRO tells us, and Wine Australia tells us, it's not Albarino, it's Savignin, and you can't call it Albarino. And so, you know, I remember, what are we going to do? Talking to people, should we pull it out? Should we keep it? Can we call it Savignin? What is Savignin? So all these questions, right? So then we started to research it, and then we decided initially to call it Savaro because we didn't want to call it Savignin because it was just too hard to say. Too close to Sauvignon.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I see it on lists today, still Savignin in the Sauvignon Blanc list. But so we call it Savaro, which is our cool tank ferment, like done as a Sauvignon Blanc style, Savignin. And it's done really well for us, that grape. And we did so well for a number of years. And then we realized it actually really ages fabulously. You know, 10 years on, it's still drinking really nicely. So then we got all these ideas and we started studying it further, and it ages, it's great. Okay, we got an ancient grape here, we found out. One of the first millennium grapes, one of the first to really be propagated. Became mother of many of today's grapes because it was so popular. So why don't we try to make it in a rudimentary way, try to get it to how it might have tasted like 1,000 years ago. So we embarked on this whole idea of doing a wild Savignin Solero system. Solero's been around a long time. A lot of port gets made in a Solero system, right? But not much white wine that way. Because we contend that, you know, 1,000 years ago, they would not have had vintage 874 on the bottle.
Yeah.
No, they wouldn't have had that. It wasn't a thing. And so we just assumed that there'd be lots of wine in some sort of cellar, some sort of environment, hopefully nice, that would have been sort of sloshing around there, and they're pouring into jugs. And how they're transporting it, who knows? And it's all getting mixed up together. And so we decided to do a Solero where we would create a mother wine and just keep adding to it to try to create depth, intensity, and funk and appeal and weight. And try to get to what it might have been. You know, we're using full solids here. We're not sort of separating any of the solids out. We're fermenting in clay eggs. We're trying to do some things that they may have done some time ago. And then this is number 3.
Number 3.
This is the third bottling of the mother wine that started in 2015. This was bottled in 21, which is the number 3. So it's, you know, it's got 5 vintages in there. We sort of add to the vintages every year or so. And it turns out like this. So it's a bit more weight in your mouth, right?
Bit more weight in the mouth. The funk is definitely there. It's got this kind of like cooked fruits kind of flavor to it, which is all quite unique. And I remember tasting it, I said, I've never tasted anything like this before, which was exciting. And you talk about, the history of the grapes and so forth, and just exploring all of that and where it came from is very exciting.
Yeah, and I like that that exploration of the history of the grapes and try to make a white wine. A lot of people don't drink white wine.
Yes.
They just drink red wine. And we see a lot of those people in our Salvador. No, I don't want to see the white wines. I just want to see your red wines. And so I think could be a white wine for a red wine drinker because it's got some more layers, it's got some more weight, it's got some more funk, right? So that's one of the good things about it. But, this really is a journey. Will we ever get to Solero number 20? Will we? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe halfway through it falls over in those ceramic eggs, and maybe just goes to jelly in 10 years time, or it becomes undrinkable. I don't know. So we're at 3. We've just bottled 4. We'll see.
How do these age as well? Though I'm thinking, old port, is it a similar thing where you've got some from the very start?
Yeah.
How are they kind of looking at the moment?
Good. And even the Savaro is looking good from the 2010 vintage that we first did. It's got the, and that's when I always thought, wow, this is Savignin. This is from the first millennium. Why did they choose this grape in the first millennium? Why did they do that? What did they actually say? Oh, this grape, this bunch of grapes over here is making good wine. Let's propagate them and let's plant them all together in a vineyard. Why did they make that decision for this grape? And so I'm contending that what I think now is that it's easy to make. It's a really easy grape to grow. It looks so healthy in the vineyard. Big plate leaves like this, dark green, so really healthy, easy to grow, wants to give us a big crop every year. And you think, wow, it's got a big crop. What's it going to be like? And it gets it ripe, gets the sugar ripe, but the acid is still there. The acid hasn't dropped out. The acid is quite intense, but it's soft in your palate. So I'm thinking the reason why they chose this is because they could actually make reasonable wine with rudimentary techniques and get a harvest every year. So for all those reasons is why I think it came out of the slime to be one of the first grapes.
What I love this is texture, but has that acid drive. But the best thing for me is like it makes me salivate.
Right,
it makes me think it's a food wine.
Saltiness, right?
Yeah.
Before we were talking about that, the Savignin, we were talking about your journey, and we'd gotten to the point where you'd set up the winery. Why? What attracted you to this site? What makes it special?
Bailey Carados, who was the founder of Yarra Valley. Because he's just here, a kilometre or 2 from us. He's on Bridie Road, and Bailey started out there, one of the first pioneers of the rejuvenation of the Yarra Valley. Because Yarra Valley was making great wine in the 1860s. Then it all got pulled out. And there was nothing for 30 years, and the likes of Bailey Carados and a few others decided to start. And he was one of them, created Yarra Valley. And then James Halliday came on the back of him, physically, I think right behind him. Yes, with his vineyard, Coldstream Hills, and they're sort of connected. And so it was Bailey a lot because I just enjoyed the wine that was coming out of the Yarra Valley. I hadn't tasted it when I was an 18-year-old. Maybe it was out of my price bracket. I don't know, but it just wasn't around. Then when I got a bit older, I said, oh, well, Yarra is a thing. Started to study it, came down and looked at it. And I remember tasting through wine with Bailey Carados and trying to understand what he was trying to do with his wines. And we were standing today where the Salvador is at Yarra Valley, maybe 20 years ago or more, and we're tasting some Cabernet that he had, and he was there in the room. And I don't know why he was there. I was there. I didn't set up an appointment. But anyway, I was tasting with him. And I was going, oh, hey, this Cabernet is a bit too herbaceous, isn't it? It's a bit green. He says, that's what I want. He said, that's what I want. What are you saying? That gives it layers. But are you just wanting fruit?
Yes.
No,
what a great conversation.
We want layers in our Cabernet. And then 10 years later, I'm drinking a second growth from Bordeaux. I smell the herbaceousness
Yes.
in a Bordeaux that cost me $300.
Yeah.
So it was those sort of conversations and my Pinot pursuit as to why we're here.
And where were you at the time when you thought you wanted to buy here? You weren't living in Yarra?
No. I remember one time we were here, I was doing quite a lot of work in Melbourne because the company I was with was bidding for the casino in Melbourne to run and develop the casino in Melbourne. We didn't win. Somebody else won.
Yeah.
But anyway, we won't go there. So I was spending a lot of time in Melbourne on that project. And I then, on my weekends, would come out here.
But then you were tasting wines, global wines from the world. You didn't think South of France. You didn't think US. You didn't think anywhere else. It was still Australia.
Yeah. I just, I think you need to be comfortable in where you're putting your money. Some people can be very aggressive with, I think it's aggressive to go and start a wine business in France where you can't even speak French.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And try to understand all the nuances and all the laws and regulations and get things done. I felt safe investing in Australia. Yeah. You know what I mean? This is, I kind of understand the rules and the laws, and it's where my family's from.
And so we might move on to the next wine, which again is quite a unique grape varietal. 2024 Marzemino from Soumah. And your selection of grape varieties, how do you land on them?
When we first planted Albarino, I was obviously interested in maybe alternative, not that Albarino is really alternative in some parts of the world, but I was interested in grapes in general. After finding out that it was Savignin, or you can call it Traminer, or you can call it Haida, or you can call it Klevner. But it was first recorded in Italy, so it's part of the Alpine region of Europe. Italian, Swiss is Savignin, right? So I started to research about Italy, and northeastern Italy, northwestern Italy, and really we believe that that's where our climate is more suited to. We're hotter than Burgundy here, even though we make some great Pinots and Chardonnays, we're hotter than Burgundy. It's an interesting thing. If you get a day-degree summation of the growing season, the growing season for a Pinot is it springs in September, and you're going to be picking it in early March. So it's like September, October, November, December. It's 6 or 7 months, right? You take that 6 or 7 months, you take the hottest temperature and the coldest temperature for every day in that 7 months, and you divide by 2. Then you add them together and divide it by the number of days. Yeah. You get a number. It's called the day-degree summation right, of the growing season. And Burgundy is about 18.6. Yeah. That's its number.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yarra is 19-something. So we're hotter. But funny enough, we're colder at night than Burgundy and hotter during the day. So our diurnal difference is much larger. So we're going to make different Pinot than they do, for sure. We can't make a Burgundy. We're not in Burgundy. We can make some great Pinot Noir, though. So I'm thinking, wow, we're hotter. The world is apparently getting hotter too, right? And we see that on our vintages getting earlier and earlier. So then I thought, we thought, let's move to somewhere where this day-degree summation is similar to us here, and it's Piedmont. Their day-degree summation is similar to the Yarra, much more similar than Burgundy. So then that started us on this journey towards northern Italy, not southern Italy, not Tuscany, not, Sicilian wines. It's too hot down there. We're not that hot. So this is where we thought we should be. So we started to research, study, select, nurture, grow, and bottle. How did this particular one come about? Well, there's obviously northwestern Italy, which is very famous, Piedmont, Barolos, Barbarescos, all sorts of things, very famous. Then you got the northeast, which is not so famous, right? Not so famous. But then I started to taste some, and I thought, wow, they taste so different. These northeastern reds, so different. Like they're sort of plummy, but red spikes. There's not much tannin in them, but they got lovely dark color. So I was tasting through some Terraldegos, which is one of these varieties, some Lagrange, which is probably the most famous of them. Yeah. But Terraldego is the parent of Lagrange and also the parent of Marzemino. So Lagrange and Marzemino are brothers. Terraldego is the parent. So I was going to plant Terraldego because it was the parent. I thought that's the one I want to plant. So I was in this trade show in Europe, And I was in the Italian stands. I was just tasting Italian wines, just so, especially from the Northeast. And I was tasting all these Terral Dagos at this wine show, talking to people, talking to winemakers. And then this Italian chap came and he just tugged me on the shoulder. He said, why are you tasting all these Terral Dagos? And I said, well, because I'm thinking this is what I really want to do. He said, come with me. Let me show you my Marzemino. Went back, went to the Marzemino, tasted them. I said, this is better. You're right. So that's why we planted Marzemino.
Wow, what an impact. And what is it that you were smelling and tasting at the time that you said, look, that's what I want in the wines that I want to produce?
Well, you're tasting it today right there. This is it. And the reason why I really enjoyed it is because look at this color. It looks so dark. It's a purple grape. You know, there's only about 10% of the grapes on earth that are actually purple and not red. This is one of them. It's a deep purple color. And so you think, oh, wow, what have I got here? I've got a big Shiraz with lots of tannin and lots of grip and, you know, big body. And then you put it in your mouth and it's wonderfully light.
Yeah.
It's wonderfully light. But it's got punchy fruit. But the fruit is not just one-dimensional. The fruit has got like the dark plums, but I always get this sort of red, spiky highlights in it, which is really interesting. There's nothing that tastes like this. Not even Terral Dago's got that. Terral Dago's got a little bit more tannin, and Lagrange has a lot more tannin than this fella, this Marzemino. So that's why, you know, it was just a chance encounter with this guy that made me have a look at the Marzemino, then tasting it, and then trying to find some to plant. And, you know, there's a bit of Marzemino growing in Australia. We're not the only one. King Valley grows it, and I think probably some in Adelaide Hills as well. But that's the reason, because it's about this whole idea. This is better for our climate, these grapes, so let's rejoice in them. And then this has got a great story too, because you're in good, if you like this wine, you're in good company, because Mozart used to like it too.
What's the story from that comes from? It's written down somewhere.
Yeah. Well, he wrote it about in his operas.
Okay.
In Don Giovanni, which was premiered in like 1786. Don Giovanni came out, one of his famous operas, Mozart. In there's a line that says, I'm going to jump to hell with a glass of Marzemino.
Wow.
So,
yeah, if Mozart likes it, it's got to be good.
if he wrote about it in his opera, he was drinking it, writing that opera. You know? He must have been, right?
Is there a symphony to your senses at the moment?
Look, while you're talking, I can't stop smelling it. I feel a bit rude because I keep lifting it to my glass, and there's just something about, there's this fruity, floral, earthy aroma that really comes through.
It is those red spikes, and I like kind of personalities of wine. It's kind of this bright, happy, joyful Italian that I'm thinking when I kind of drink this wine. Yeah,
exactly. So if you're going to write your first opera, come and get a couple of glasses. Right?
Definitely.
You got to write that up and get some creativity going. But it is fun, and it's got great history.
Yeah, I guess the question I have is, you know, talk about that kind of science behind that decimation, but I'm sure deep in your heart it's also that kind of, I want to make that kind of Piedmont, Italy thing kind of work here as well, because there is that kind of gelling and bond between the food, the wine, the culture, which I'm sure you've been to before as well, that you kind of loved, and that passion they're trying to bring here into Yarra. Yeah,
that's right. So, you know, we've planted a fair few Italian grapes from the north, and so now we have an Italian trattoria, and we have, you know, that style. You know, interesting enough, I think there's two types of people. There's Italians and people that want to be Italian.
Which one are you?
Because it's a lifestyle, right? Yeah. It's their lifestyle. Everybody just thinks, oh, I'd love to go and live in Italy, wouldn't you?
Yes, I
would. We've been talking about we need to go visit there. Yeah.
So that's the thing.
My wife knows one of the favourite spots that we've been to is Piedmont as well. That kind of marriage of food, wine, culture, and the simplicity of it as well.
Yeah. The simplicity and the sort of the earthiness of what they do, right? It's really, it seems like they're not on any commercial pursuit. Yeah. You know,
it's for the love.
About the love, amore,
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. And so we're just trying to carve out a little piece of that idea here. Yeah.
You know you're serious when you have a pizza oven like you do in the restaurant there, like that serious pizza oven, which creates fantastic pizzas that we had for lunch as well.
And this is probably a sign of how serious you are about the Piedmont region, because we've got Nebbiolo, which feels like the most popular grape variety from the region. So it's the 2021 Nebbiolo.
Okay.
And obviously we're in Yarra Valley, so we can't replicate what's happening in Piedmont, Barolo, Barbaresco. So this has its own distinct style.
Yeah.
How would you describe the Nebbiolo from Yarra Valley?
There's a little bit of Nebbiolo being grown in the Yarra. We've got 3.5 acres here, about 1.5 hectares, and there's probably 20 hectares being grown here, so not much. Why we have this grape is because it is the king of Italian red wines. You know, it is probably the most expensive, the most, rejoiced red from Italy. You know, obviously the Brunello di Montalcino is probably going to say they've got it.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's one of them, right? It's one of the kings of reds. And it's expensive, the Barolos and Barbarescos. But, to have a Barolo, it's got to be within Barolo, right? Yeah. There's a township called Barolo, and all around it, if you grow Nebbiolo there, you can call it Barolo. It's not that big. And if you want to grow Barbaresco, it's around the town of Barbaresco, and that's it. Everything outside of those little hamlets, can we say, is Nebbiolo is growing, but they can't call it Barolo and Barbaresco. What do they call it? They call it Longhi Nebbiolo, right? Nebbiolo from Longhi, which is the greater region, right? Yeah. So, you're talking about this is not a Barolo. It's not. But you know what? When I taste this and we've learned about it, and this is probably our 7th vintage of it, the 21. I think we're doing a pretty good, I believe, Longhi Nebbiolo. I think it's got what I think they've got. Yeah. And what this grape has is a really interesting thing, very different from the Marzemino. What do they say about Nebbiolo? It's like a fist in a silk glove, right? It's just, the silk glove is this wonderful, violets and prettiness, and it's not like a Shiraz jumping out at you. You got to almost seek it up, and you seek it out, and wow, it's pretty, it's lovely. So you're thinking it's going to be a pretty lovely thing in your mouth. No, put it in your mouth, and it's got this grip, grabs your cheeks and throws them around a bit, and gives you some great length. So it's this idea of it, which is very interesting. So Nebbiolo for me, it is a labor for us for sure, right? To make it and to grow it. It's the most difficult thing we do. I can get into that, but it also is a really age-worthy wine too. So and goes with this whole grip in the mouth. So it's perfect for some foods, right? It's not going to be for 6 oysters natural, right? Yeah. It's not that. Yeah. So what is it for? It's for something with a bit of oil and like an ossobuco, right? Or a big juicy steak with a bit of fat, or even that big cheesy pizza where you got some fat and some grease in your palate, and you've got the grip, you got the cleaning grip from the Nebbiolo, and that's a really good thing about it.
What surprises me about it, and trying it again, it's still surprising me, is for 2021, the grip is actually softer in comparison to something of similar age from Barolo or Barbaresco. So there is something a bit different about the grip in terms of that stuff. It's still heavily present, not as strong as what you get from the Barolos. Is there anything in the vineyard, in the winemaking that helps with that?
I think what's happening is that there are many different Barolos. Yeah. And some would be much grippier than this, and some would be less. Yeah. And, because there's quite a few schools of thought up there in people, how they're going to make their Barolos, right? And some of it make it in a very traditional method, and some make it in a very modern method. We follow the more traditional method because we think we want to soften the tannins down. We don't want to have them really overt in your palate. And I think maybe sometimes Barolo can be that, and maybe it's the way they make them. Yeah. That particular producer wants it that style, so they pursue that. Yeah. We're trying to soften the tannins down. We can't get rid of the tannins. They're there. But when they're on your palate, we want them to be soft. Yes. So not grippy and harsh. And so you go through a few things to do that, right? To actually get those tannin molecules to join together in like a chorus, rather than be bouncing around your mouth, all little tiny tannins. We want them to join together as a chorus of tannins, which are still there, but now they're going to be soft. So how do we get the tannins to polymerize? How do we get them to join together? So, we didn't stumble across this. We learned it from some Italian producers, being out there talking to them about how they produce it. And one of the ways is leaving it on its skins in the fermentation vessel, whatever that might be, for about 4 months. And doing pump overs, pumping the juice, the wine, it's now wine, there's no sugar left, pumping that over the skins and keeping the skins, pumping it over for 4 months or so, right? And it sounds counterintuitive, right? Doesn't it?
Yes.
It sounds like, why would you leave it on its skins, mate, if you want the tannins to be softer?
Yeah.
It's crazy. But for some reason, it does create this environment where they do start to polymerize and get softer. I'm no chemist, but that's one of the steps, right? And so then once we decide that's enough, then the wine is taken off and put into barrel. So we're not going to use any new oak, because new oak will also add tannins to a wine, right? Now, some Barolo producers will be using new oak.
Yeah.
We don't. We used to use old, larger format barrels. We don't use barriques, we use puncheons. They're 500 litres, about 2.5 times the size of a barrique. So large format barrels that have been seasoned with other wine for a couple of years beforehand. So there's no tannin coming into the wine from the barrel anymore. And then the aging process will also help those tannins join. Yeah. Right. So then it's a matter of just leaving it sit in these larger format barrels with no tannins coming in and softening down. So then they go into these barrels and they stay in the winery for 2 or 3 years before we'll bottle them. Yeah. With a Pinot Noir, we're done and dusted in 9 months from picking. It's in the bottle. Yeah. You're drinking it, right? A Pinot Noir. And all across the world, people make it in a similar way. Our Nebbiolo, it's a 3-year process before we get it into the bottle. Yeah. So and I haven't started talking about the vineyard yet, about how difficult it is in the vineyard too. So it is a bit of a labor for sure.
But all of those winemaking practices have helped soften the tannins, which is what makes it even more approachable, which is great.
Yeah.
Well, you touched on the vineyard, like in terms of how you're creating this Nebbiolo, is it more stylistically what you're trying to go after? Or is it more understanding the fruit that you're kind of getting as an expression of Yarra Valley Nebbiolo?
I think we haven't learned everything we need to learn about it yet, especially in the vineyard. We find it problematic in the vineyard because it has a huge, physiological year. It's the first to bud burst in our vineyard. So it'll be bud burst in this last week of August. It'll start to be growing. And then it will be the last to be harvest, sometimes late April, this time of the year, right? So it just sits out there for so long. What's the problem about that in the wine or vineyard business is the longer your grapes sit out there, the more trouble they're going to get into, right? Because it's just more storms, more heat, more rain, wasps, birds, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you can get your crop in real quick, that's done. It's in the winery. Yeah. It's in the bottle, but this Nebbiolo just got to sit out there and sit out there and sit out there. And as it's sitting out there, you want to keep it, ripening and keep and protect it. And so there's lots of problems in that to get it across the line. And then you want it across the line in a really, the great Beaumet sugar level. And I studied this, the numbers from Barolo, and I stumbled across this summary, which is great, of of all of the vintages for the last 30 years, and they were giving numbers of their Beaumet and their acid level of the fruit that was picked. And in our terms, I'm using our terms, not their terms, because then we had to sort of calculate those into our terms, that Barolo average gets picked at about 13.5 Beaumet, which is quite right. It's quite right. Like it's like a Shiraz, a big Shiraz. But the acid level that they're usually picking at is 3.2 pH plus 13.5 Beaumet. It's almost like unworldly to get those numbers. Yep. Now, we've never hit those numbers yet. we haven't been able to get a crop across the line at 13.5 Beaume and 3.2 or a little bit more in pH. Sometimes the fruit is not getting to that ripeness, that sugar level, right? Sometimes the acid is at that level, but the sugar's not there yet. So it's a learning for us, right? And we're going through that learning still. And so even this year we had trouble. And so we decided to change some of the things we do next year for the upcoming 2026 harvest in the vineyard with the Nebbiolo to try to hit these two almost seem impossible goals.
What are you trying?
Oh, well, it depends on the clone too. The clones all act differently. We've got 4 clones, and they all want to do something a little different. So, but one thing is obviously limiting the crop. The other thing is we're going to endeavor to take it to dry grown.
Yeah,
dry grown, like not water it. That means we may lose a complete harvest as the roots start to drive deeper. And find the water themselves. Yeah. And we think that might help us get to these 2 unworldly numbers because maybe it's the right thing to do. The other thing is we've always been so insistent upon keeping the canopy around the grapes, keeping the canopy. Oh, the canopy's looking really a bit sick in there. Let's put some water on there, or let's work out why it's not. And then start to look further more at Barolo, right? And you look at their crops, and it's before harvest, and they're almost like they're dead. The vines look like they're dead because there's no leaf left, and all the grapes are sitting out there, all the bunches are sitting out there. And so it's a completely different picture than what we would be wanting to pursue. So we don't know. But we're going to tweak some things up to change it.
Tweaking, but also to your point before about the lesson learned about also some time as well to give it to adjust to the changes that you apply.
That's right. Yeah, so it'll take us a couple of years to do that. So it is some fun.
I love the mentality of experiment and trial because that's the only way you can find out results and what works. And I feel like the next wine that we have in front of us is definitely going to work. It's the Brachetto Frizzante de Soumah. And I might let you do the honors. I've just untied it. If you want to pop the cork on that.
Oh, you're testing my strength.
And see.
These are hard to get out. Oh, okay.
Hey, there we go.
So this wine's a little frizzante.
Yeah.
A little frothy, not quite sparkling.
So very excited to try this because I feel like Brachetto is one of those varietals that everyone's going to love. Kind of like a pinot.
It's funny how many people do like it.
Yeah.
Because the idea of it being fizzy, sweet, and a little lower alcohol, you sort of think of a demographic, right? That people might like this, right? But funnily enough, it's a lot wider of a demographic than you think that's going to like this. And it's the intro. We're talking about at the beginning of our talk. Yeah. It's that wine journey. What's some people going to start at? They're going to start at something like this on their wine journey. They will end up at Pinot, but the idea is that because there's some other things that I can say about it. It's like people know Moscato, right?
Yes.
It's quite omnipresent out there on the shelves, right? Yes. And a lot of people drink Moscato. So I liken this to an adult Moscato. And why am I saying that? Is because it's got half the sugar of Moscato and it's got twice the alcohol. So therefore, the adult idea of Moscato in a glass. This is an interesting journey. We were up talking to Enzo Brezza at Brezza Wines in Barolo, and he was taking us through his cellars. We're staying with him, and he's got a little motel, sort of like we do here, beside his winery. And he's just down the hill from the township of Barolo. And he's on some of the most famous land in Barolo too. Anyway, my wife and I decided to take a day off and not sort of pursue the wine thing so much. And we said, let's just drive around Piedmont like you've probably done, right? You're just following your nose driving around. And we ended up going through Barbaresco and ending up further up in the hills. And we came across this town called Acqui, A-Q-U-I. And drive into the town square. Everybody's sitting around the town square. They're all drinking pink wine out of tumblers. They're not drinking out of wine glasses. They're drinking out of tumblers like this in the town square. What are they drinking? So we stopped, parked the car, went over, said, we'll have 2 of those. Wow. Never tasted anything like it. I didn't know Brachetto had existed at that point until that afternoon.
Yeah.
And we just looked at, wow, this is crazy drink.
Yes.
Taste of strawberries, taste of roses, like liquid Turkish delight.
That's what I think about each time I have it. Turkish delight, yes.
And so we said, we're just going to have to plant some of it. We're going to find some of this and plant it. So from that afternoon, deciding we're going to do this, to actually getting some in a bottle was about a 6-year journey, because we had to find Brachetto in Australia. Now, there are some producers of Brachetto in Australia, but we wanted to find one of the newer clones. Yeah. And so we found some after some research in a nursery in Perth. They had a few rows of vines in a nursery. So, and they hadn't been selling it. You know, as a nursery, they want to sell their, so they weren't sure what they're going to do with this Brachetto, and said, look, I'd like you to propagate me 5,000 vines. And so that takes a year or so, and then we've got to plant it, and then that takes a few years to get it, and then you get it in the bottle.
Yeah. I do think that it is one of those wines that it's so approachable to have, but that Turkish delight flavor comes through. It's actually got a touch of tannin on it.
Yeah.
There's a tiny bit of grip on there, which again goes to that, you know, it's more serious, grown up kind of wine.
Yeah.
Yep. As opposed to Moscato.
It's got a little bit of skin contact. You know why? Because we found out in the early years of making it that this like roses and strawberries comes from the skins, the fleshy bits around near the skin, in the skin. And so we want to drag everything we can from the skins. And we want it to sort of macerate on its skins and macerate before we start processing it, right? So we actually pick it now and we put it in a cool room for 3 days. It can't ferment because it's only like 3 or 4 degrees in there.
Right.
So it's not going to start fermenting, so we don't care. But just this grape sitting there in its own juice, macerating with the skins, pulling out as much flavor as we can from those skins before we start to press it off and do whatever we have to do with it.
I haven't seen many Australian producers with Brachetto. How is the market finding this? Are they responding to it really well? What's the interest coming?
The interest is good. We have 2 acres of it, and now we've just taken it off tasting in the cellar door because we're going to run out.
Yeah, okay. Interest is very good.
the next one's going to be with us in early June.
Yeah,
the 25 vintage.
Yeah,
it's now in the winery, and it'll be with us. But we've taken it off because we don't want to run out, because we have wholesale business that we want. You know, restaurants that are pouring our wine, we don't want to tell them we don't have any left.
Yeah.
You know, we can't say that to them, but we can take it off our cellar door, save some of our stock for our wholesale market.
I can see why it's getting sold out, because it's one of those really kind of drinkable wines. Like you talked about sweet and savory before, and also feels like you have this with some prosciutto, similar to like the prosciutto and melon thing. And it feels like that kind of sweet and savory kind of mix will just go fantastically as well. So maybe that's something you can add onto the menu.
That's right. We could. Exactly. There's no reason why you can't have this with a nice, charcuterie board.
Yeah.
Even some soft cheese, right?
It's delicious.
They do say that you can taste with your eyes. I do want to hold this to the camera because the color is just amazing. It's kind of this electric pale red, really beautiful. Well, approaching the tail end of the interview, did you have any last questions, Trent?
Oh, I don't know how long this is going to go for, but we haven't really touched on the vineyards. Like the 2 big vineyards is the Hexham and the Upper Ngumby as well. How do they differ? What do they speak of? What are you seeing in them?
Yeah, and that's fun, isn't it? That really is a great part of the business, to be able to just see that patch of land at work versus another patch of land at work. And they're not far apart, right? This is the Hexham vineyard we're at. The Upper Ngumby vineyard's probably 10 kilometers as the crow flies, maybe even less than that. But it's a different piece of land because it's actually up against the Christmas Hills near Yarra Glen. The Yarra River runs past Yarra Glen and it starts to go west from Yarra Glen towards Melbourne, the Yarra River. And when it's running west towards Melbourne, it follows the Christmas Hills. Christmas Hills are here, the river's here. And so this up in Ngumby vineyard is right up between the river and the Christmas Hills, right? And so, and it's neighboring both sides of it. And the beauty of that is that the Christmas Hills shade this vineyard in the hot afternoon sun. You know, in summertime, you've gone through veraison, your grapes are starting to, your Pinot, for instance, is starting to change color, starting to add sugar now. You've gone through that veraison period. You got 6 weeks towards harvest. And it's still hot here because you've got daylight saving. It's still hot here at 7:30 at night, and the sun's still beating down. But up in the Ngumby vineyard, it's in the shade, because the Christmas Hills are shading it, right? They've got a slightly different soil there too, a bit more rock and schist, maybe from the river. They're closer to the river. They're sort of lower altitude. So it's completely different flavor. So the Upper Ngumby Chardonnay and Pinot that we do that are single vineyards have a completely different expression. However, we treat them exactly the same as a Hexham vineyard. We don't change the recipe. So we're just trying to just keep it the same and just let those vineyards talk, right? Let them talk, and they talk in different ways. The Hexham vineyard's going to be lovely, sweet cherry fruit, almost to a fault. Lovely, and which takes a couple of years to sort of integrate, and the savouriness will start to move forward. The Upper Ngumby moves out of the blocks with this much more minerally sort of style to it because of this shading. Also, it stays on the vine longer because it's not out in the sun. We're picking it usually 2 weeks later than the Hexham vineyard. So that's a really nice thing to be with, and you know, I think they're both great wines. They're just a different style. So it depends what you're eating, where you are, what you like today.
Great. I did have one last question. 45 years old, you said now's the time to set this up. You probably had a vision and a goal of what you wanted to achieve. How do you know when you've reached the goal or the vision that you actually wanted when you set this up?
I don't know. I think I've reached it now. I think I'm doing what I wanted to do, right? I don't have a day job anymore. You know what I mean? This is my complete being now. So, so I've achieved what I want. I've got a great team around me, a great winemaker, a great viticulturist, great people in charge of hospitality. And so I'm able to strategize, think, talk to people, and continue to pursue these ideas. We haven't finished with our Italian story yet. So, you know, I think this is it. At 45, what did I want to do? I didn't want to have a day job. I wanted to be in my own wine business. And if it can put food on your table and you're doing that, it's good.
I think I can say, and maybe for yourself as well, very envious of what you've achieved. It's fantastic. I like from the moment we got into here, having the food with our family, I was saying to TJ, the manager here, that there's such a great vibe about this place. Like the energy, the presence, the visuals, the food, all comes together. The wine, of course. It's definitely a place to visit for anyone coming to Yarra Valley. Did you have any last messages for our audience? Any key things, any future events, any things you wanted to share?
No, not really. I think people should just continue to experiment with wine, I think, is that, you know, just try new varieties and you know, just go out there and find different things. That's what I like people coming to Soumah, because they may be just Shiraz drinkers, right? Which is great. And I like a great Shiraz too. But, you know, when you get to a winery, then you can see all these different varieties going. And I see people's face light up when I'm doing tastings for people about our wine. Wow, I haven't tasted anything like that before. So I think that's what my message is, you know. If you're into wine, and if you're probably into wine if you're listening to YouTube, then just keep pursuing that and getting out into the winery regions of Australia, not just the Yarra, but everywhere you possibly can, and rejoicing in what people are doing.
Absolutely. Trent, did you have any last reflections?
Again, to your point, very envious, being able to pursue a passion, pursue a dream, and also allowing yourself to pursue your curiosity as well with wine, also with a vineyard. And I can't wait to also then start to pursue the wines that you start to create next as well with your Italian wine journey.
Yeah, thank you.
I haven't met someone so passionate, knowledgeable about wine in the way that you talk about it. You talk about it in a way that really draws you in. I think you were saying when people do a tasting, their eyes open up. Every time I listen to you speak, talk about the history, the facts, etc., it just shows this real passion and love for it that comes through. And to get to that level of detail and knowledge, you have to have the passion there. So definitely for any of our audience, come have a chat to Brett if he's around, and he'll share all of that great knowledge.
Most weekends in the cellar door.
Perfect. Come visit. So thanks again, Brett. Really appreciate the time. That's us here at the Wind Up. As we like to say here, drink more,
try more, learn more.
Thanks all.